Hello, my name is Erin Henshaw, and this is my presentation about neurocognitive disorders. This is a presentation really near and dear to my heart. I'm doing something a little non-traditional and talking about the impact of toxic mold or mold exposure on neurocognition, because this is something that happened to me 2 years ago, and I'm still healing from it. And I think people don't understand the risks, the impact, and some of the symptoms, all of that. And then it's particularly relevant to social work because it's more likely that people with less means, older buildings, areas with less resources are affected by mold. And so it's something that I really want to share because doctors are not aware of how to test and look for mold. It's really not on the radar. I'll talk about why I think that is. And so let's just get into it. So basically, the definition from the DSM-5 of neurocognitive disorders are some type of impairment to cognition that has not been present since birth or early life. And so thus it represents a decline from previously attained levels of functioning. So traditional neurocognitive disorders that you might be familiar with would be Alzheimer's, dementia, Lewy body, Parkinson's, and traumatic brain injury. There's also more unique categories such as NCDs, as they call them, neurodevelopmental disorders related to HIV, substance medications, so being given a medication and then having an NCD develop, and also prion disease. So what I will say is that mold exposure is not currently listed in the DSM. And so this is going to be a big barrier towards diagnosis, awareness, all of this. And if you have ideas about, how to make this more prevalent, please let me know because it literally ruined my life. Okay, so I read an article from 2021, and let me go ahead and share my screen here. Let me pause for a second and get my screen up. Okay, so this is an article from the National Institutes of Health that was particularly relevant because it's from 2021, and it's about how mold inhalation causes innate immune activation, neurocognitive, and emotional dysfunction. And so some of the symptoms, you can just look at my notes here, of being exposed to mold are pain, fatigue, increased anxiety, depression, cognitive deficits. And so, as I mentioned, this is kind of controversial because there's not enough research at the moment to examine the effects of controlled mold exposure. And also, there is not a distinguishable difference in challenges caused by innate immune activation from mold versus bacterial or viral exposure. And what I will say is that mold suppresses the whole immune system by causing inflammatory immune system response. And then lots of latent disorders or infections, such as with me with Lyme or Epstein-Barr, actually explode within the body. And so it's hard to tell, like I was first diagnosed with Lyme, then Epstein-Barr, then the mold, only by a specialist, because there wasn't an easy way to distinguish between the symptoms. Like I rated high on all of these things. And so it wasn't clear to my primary care doctor that mold was the underlying cause. So the findings of this study, and it was done on mice, not on humans, was that there were high levels of cytokine release, which is a immune system overreaction to an infection at the exposure sites. So this determined that the immune activation was the mechanism for the mold causing all of these issues, and they're systematic within the body. So if you have anything, like I mentioned, latent, it's going to make it all flare up. our body has a really great natural ability to keep things at bay unless the immune system is just completely overwhelmed and taxed. And so what part of the brain, where does this actual cognition part come in? That's in the hippocampus, the hippocampal area. So as we might know, the hippocampus is where we store memories. And so that long-term memory making is significantly impaired by the mold. I'll say that being in grad school during this time was nearly impossible because I couldn't accept new information and I couldn't store long-term information. And so that's the cognitive impairments. Is taking in new information and then storing. So how I got through that, if you're interested, is basically I wrote about a lot of things from my experiences in social work and in healing, and then tried my very best to get through new material, but it was and has been very brutal. So interestingly, non-toxic and toxic spores can cause this immune response. And it's associated with decreased neurogenesis. So that means new creation of nerve cells. So you're not healing, you're not creating new circuitry. It's basically impossible to learn. Memory deficits, auditory cues for memory, fear cues for memory. So like simple auditory cues will provide a trigger response. Like if I heard things that reminded me of something that I had been scared of before, it was like 100-time impact. So like if the dog barked, it would send just complete shudders through my nervous system. If there was a fight with the neighbors next door, it felt completely overwhelming. And then also it really activated a shutdown freeze response every night. Like I was incapable of listening to music, watching TV, doing schoolwork. I'd just try to do it early in the morning because by night, my immune system would be shut down and I would just go into freeze. And even a year after, next month marks a year after getting out of the moldy environment, I still have significant challenges with the freeze response at night. So long-term effects is that it's a multi-system health problem at the level of, and this article says at the level of smoking, pesticide exposure, or traumatic brain injury. So this is pretty serious and another, more readily accepted neurocognitive challenge. Okay, I feel like I'm going a little slow here, but there is also research, which I'll share from 2004, which does test on humans. So this research has been around for a while. And similar findings, 31 human subjects and cognitive impairment associated with toxigenic fungal exposure. That means mold. So, I did validate these more current findings with previous studies. So I can share those links. Okay, let's go to some of these websites. The Virginia Department of Health, what did they happen to say about this? There is no practical way to eliminate all mold and mold spores from the indoor environment. The key to controlling indoor mold growth is controlling the moisture source. So this comes from bathrooms predominantly. It comes from old foundations. The thing is, if you're in a shared HVAC situation, even if you're controlling your bathroom mold, you are sharing that mold from every single apartment in the building. So I can no longer be in any kind of shared HVAC situation. Very interestingly, VDH does not have the capability to provide environmental testing or remediation for mold problems or provide legal advice because they know this would be a massively expensive, very difficult blow to property developers and all the people with money that they want to protect. So that's why I think this is being kept under wraps and it's a significant crisis. Here's an OSHA manual for preventing mold-related problems in the workplace. I looked up, I even paid for rental insurance and it did not cover water-based, they say water-based, but they really mean mold damages under a rental plan. Fire, yes, mold, no, again, because it's such a huge problem. So here's a website from the EPA. Again, there is no practical way to eliminate mold and mold spores in an indoor environment. The way to control mold growth is to control moisture. So when we talk about mold remediation, that's like if it's isolated to one small area because of, I don't know, a towel that was left in a corner for a while. But when it gets to be systematic in a building, home, whatever, the EPA says you cannot remediate. So I looked up more EPA regulations about remediation in schools and commercial buildings. There is some recourse for publicly funded facilities. And so, for example, here's something about school mold reporting. You have to, the local school board is responsible for the testing and parent notification. As a side note, I tried to do this with my apartment building. They are a HUD recipient, and they basically started to refuse to answer my emails. I'm not sure if I have the strength to open a legal battle, but as a social worker, I'm thinking about it. I'm going down those channels. It's just, I would say it brought me like closer to death than I expected to be at my age, and, you know, significant. Well, I'll talk about how you know in a second. But anyways, local school board has to talk to the Environmental Protection Agency, and then they will come to either remediate, contact parents, or shut down the facility. So how you know if you have extreme levels of mold, number one is the eyes. Your eyes will burn. You can't look at a screen. I couldn't hardly even look at my phone to answer text messages. They start to hurt so bad. And there's mold detector tests online where you look at the gray scale to see if you can notice differences in gray and white. And if you have mold in your eyes, it's very hard to do that. Mine got so advanced that affected my heart, my lungs. I started to have mild seizures, anxiety, depression, emotional regulation challenges. So all of that was a precursor to the long-term memory challenges. Let's see. I think that's most of my notes. Yeah, it is. Hopefully I'm not too far beyond time. What I will say is that there are just two basic things that you need to remediate mold and start to repair the cognitive impairments. So I would guess this is maybe why it won't get into the DSM-5, because as far as I understand, the brain can repair itself if you haven't had too chronic of exposure. Mine was about 2 years. We'll see. I still notice significant memory impairments. But sauna and binders. So when you heat up your body temperature to warmer than 65, about where the mold can grow, then it pushes out of your cells, it dies. And then you take binders. So there's something called like GI detox that has clay, charcoal, seaweed, and one other binder to bind to the mold and flush it out of your system. I will also say that if you're predisposed like me with genetics, that means 25% of people cannot naturally clear mold from their body. So I was particularly susceptible to this, but it is a genetic mutation that happens to 25% of the population. Okay, thanks for listening. And I really hope that as social workers, we can advocate on behalf of so many people that we help out with mold exposure, and like get this the recognition that it deserves, and really save so many people from things like dementia. There's connections with Parkinson's and just general mood disorders, cognitive impairments. Mold is the underlying cause of so many of these things, and no one's talking about it. Thanks.